They said the fog never lifted that morning, the kind that clings to your throat when you breathe, that rolls across the ridges like something alive. Sheriff Dale Mercer was the first to see it. The small shape crouched near the hollow tree line, just off Route 9, a child barefoot, knees caked in mud, eyes too wide for the world. When he tried to call out, she didn't move, didn't even blink, just stared at him the way an animal might if it had never seen a man before. It was October of 1968, and the Hollow Ridge woods had been silent for months. Locals said the clan up there, the Carvers, had finally gone quiet. No one had seen smoke from their chimney since spring. But no one went to check either. People in Hollow Ridge learned long ago to leave that family alone. Hello everyone, before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. The girl was maybe 9, wouldn't speak, wouldn't take food. When they brought her into town, she clawed at the sheriff's deputy and made a sound that wasn't quite human. The doctor on call at Fairview Hospital wrote something strange in his report that day. Patient displays familiarity with environment inconsistent with isolation, smells of sulfur and wet iron, pupils unreactive to light. The next day they found 2 more children, a boy near the old quarry, another girl at the edge of the creek that cut behind the Carver homestead. All of them wearing clothes made of burlap, all of them with the same look, eyes open, mouths sealed tight, as if they'd been told never to speak. The sheriff finally made the climb up Hollow Ridge. He found the house sunken into the hill, doors open, fire pit cold. But no bodies, no signs of struggle, just the smell, that strange metallic odor that made the deputies gag. In the cellar, under a tarp, was something he would never describe to anyone outside the department. The coroner's report was sealed, and within 6 months, the state closed the case. Official cause: unverified psychological trauma. But that doesn't explain what happened to those children afterward, or why, for years after, townsfolk swore they saw them walking along the ridge at night, holding hands, whispering to the dark. They were called the Hollow Ridge Clan's children. And what happened next? Well, it defied everything nature ever allowed. Before the children, before the silence, there was the ridge itself, Hollow Ridge, an old scar in the Appalachian spine of West Virginia. The soil there runs black with shale and iron, and when it rains, the ground bleeds rust. Locals say that long before the Carvers built their homestead, that ridge had another name, the Holler of the Lost. Old mining maps mark it as unfit for habitation, but people forget what that means. The Carvers moved there in 1927, led by Amos Carver, a preacher without a church, a man who claimed to hear God in the wind between the trees. He took his wife Eliza and their 3 sons up into those woods, saying the world below was spoiled by sin and men's machines. They built their home by hand, far from town, far from the power lines. People would hear their songs echo down the valley at night, old hymns, twisted by distance, sung too slow, too deep. By 1943, the Carvers had grown into a small community, 8 families, all bound by Amos's sermons. They called themselves the Keepers of the Ridge. No one from town went up there anymore. Children whispered that if you got too close, you'd see lights under the ground. There were rumors, of course, that they married only among themselves, that the ridge had no graveyard because no one ever died, or at least no one was buried. When the war ended, the government sent census takers into the area. Only 3 families remained. Amos was gone. The report listed him as missing, presumed dead, and Eliza kept the homestead alive until the early 60s. She was seen only once after 1963, walking barefoot along the creek bed, carrying what looked like a bundle of hair. By 1968, when those children appeared, everyone assumed the ridge was empty. But the truth is, the Carvers never really left. They just went deeper, down into the caverns beneath the shale, down where the iron turns to something older, something that hums when you touch it. And whatever they found down there, it changed them. The sheriff's deputy who entered that cellar said later, in his final interview before he disappeared, it wasn't that the Carvers were gone. It was that they'd become part of the ridge itself. When the 3 Carver children were brought to Fairview Hospital, no one could agree on what to do with them. The county didn't have the resources, and the state didn't want the case. For the first 2 weeks, they were kept in isolation, white rooms, locked doors, constant observation. But no matter who entered those rooms, the result was the same silence. They didn't speak, not in words, not even in cries. But at night, the nurses swore they heard something else, a sound under the floor, a low rhythm almost like humming, not from the children's throats, but from the air itself. One nurse said it made her nose bleed. Another quit the next morning after finding small stones arranged in a circle beneath the girl's bed. Stones that hadn't been in the room the night before. Medical reports described them as developmentally atypical. That's a polite way to say their bodies didn't make sense. Their bones were denser than normal. The scans showed mineral deposits along their spines, like veins of ore. Their fingerprints were identical, not similar, identical. The youngest boy, maybe 6 or 7, had a scar behind his ear, as if something had once been embedded there. The doctors assumed it was surgical, but the Carvers didn't have doctors. When one psychiatrist from Charleston attempted to communicate using flashcards, the eldest girl finally reacted. He showed her a picture of a mountain. She looked up, slow, deliberate, and pointed not to the picture, but to the ceiling above her. Then she smiled. That was the first and last time she showed emotion. The staff grew uneasy. One janitor claimed he saw the children standing at the window during a thunderstorm, whispering into the glass. Another swore he heard the same whisper later that night, coming from the boiler room, repeating 3 words he couldn't understand. By the end of that month, 2 of the hospital staff were dead. One from an apparent heart attack, the other found drowned in a maintenance basin, even though the water was only a foot deep. After that, the hospital quietly transferred the children to an undisclosed facility upstate. Their files were stamped, property of Department M. No one in Fairview ever heard of that department again. But the whispers in Hollow Ridge didn't stop. They say if you stood near the tree line that winter, you could hear children's voices humming beneath the soil, the same tune the Carvers once sang on Sunday nights. The facility didn't have a name, at least not one that appeared on any map. It sat at the base of Pine Hollow, disguised as a tuberculosis ward. Locals called it the Gray Barn, but it wasn't disease they studied there. It was something older, something that breathed beneath the mountain. The Carver children arrived on December 12, 1968. The first recorded note came from a man named Dr. Edwin Mallory, a biophysicist brought in from Oak Ridge. He wrote, "These children exhibit electromagnetic anomalies during REM sleep. Instruments fail within a 10-foot radius." Mallory's team conducted 23 tests over 4 months. All failed to yield anything that could be measured, only observed. Lights flickered when the children slept. Clocks slowed. In one case, a pulse monitor melted without heat. But the most disturbing discovery came from sound recordings. During a routine interview, the audio picked up a low harmonic frequency, far below human hearing. When slowed down, it formed a pattern of repeating words. Latin, some said. Others swore it wasn't language at all, but mimicry, something imitating speech. Dr. Mallory became obsessed. He stopped sleeping, stayed in the observation room for days, sketching shapes on yellow legal pads, circles inside circles, with lines that curved inward like a tunnel. The drawings matched something from the Carvers' abandoned home, symbols carved into the stone of their cellar, half covered in dried clay. Then, on April 3, 1969, the recordings stopped. The staff logs show an unscheduled power loss lasting 6 minutes. When electricity returned, 3 researchers were missing, and all 3 Carver children were standing outside their rooms, barefoot, eyes open, faces blank. Security footage showed them opening locked doors without touching them, just standing there, and the doors moved. The next day, the facility was sealed, all personnel reassigned. Dr. Mallory's remaining notes were confiscated by a military courier, labeled topographic incident, and that was the end of the official record. Unofficially, one nurse, a woman named Helen Rivers, wrote a letter to her sister 2 years later. It was never sent, found only after her death in 1984. The letter ends with a single sentence that still chills archivists to this day. They were trying to understand the ridge, but they didn't realize the ridge was already inside them. By the early 1970s, Hollow Ridge was all but abandoned. The mine had closed, the post office shuttered, and what few families remained called it cursed ground. The Carver homestead rotted under the weight of its own silence. Yet one cold night in 1972, lights were seen on the ridge again, not lanterns, not fire, blue, white, flickering like lightning trapped under the soil. It was the sheriff's son, Tommy Mercer, who saw them first. He'd grown up hearing the stories, the children, the disappearances, the cellar that hummed. But like most young men, he wanted to prove it was all superstition. He and two friends hiked the ridge that night with flashlights and a borrowed rifle. They found the remains of the Carver house, barely standing, the air heavy with iron and rain. But what they didn't expect was the smell, like ozone and something sweet, like rot mixed with honey. In the center of what had once been the living room, they found a circle of small stones, arranged carefully, just like the nurse's story from Fairview. Inside the circle were 3 sets of footprints, small, bare, and fresh. Only one of the boys came back down that ridge, Tommy. He was found the next morning wandering the road, barefoot, mumbling something over and over. Witnesses said his eyes were open but glassy, like he wasn't seeing the same world anymore. When the sheriff asked him what happened, Tommy whispered, "They came home." They never stopped humming. He spent the rest of his life in a state hospital, drawing those same circular patterns Dr. Mallory had filled his notebooks with. For the next decade, Hollow Ridge became a ghost. No one dared enter the woods after dark. Those who did claimed the ground vibrated faintly under their feet, as if something deep below was alive and moving. Miners spoke of hearing children's laughter echoing through old shafts sealed since the 40s. By the time the state fenced off the area in 1981, Hollow Ridge was no longer just a story. It was a wound that refused to close. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? Would you have gone looking for the truth or let it stay buried? Because the next part of this story, that's when the ridge starts to answer back. By 1984, Hollow Ridge was under federal control. They called it an environmental containment site, though no one ever said what they were containing. Locals said the fences hummed at night. Hunters avoided the area, dogs refused to go near it. Yet even with all that, people still went missing. It started with a survey team, 3 men sent to record soil composition near the southern slope. Only one returned. His name was Howard Finch. When he was found 2 days later, wandering barefoot through the fog, he was carrying something in his pocket, a handful of small black stones arranged in a circle. His fingernails were packed with dirt, his eyes rolled back, and his last recorded words before dying in the ambulance were, "They remembered me." That same summer, a phenomenon began to plague the valley towns. Locals called it the echo. Every night, just before midnight, radios would pick up a low tone, steady, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. Sometimes, faintly, a child's voice could be heard through the static, humming that same hollow tune. The same one the Carvers sang. Tapes exist, old reel-to-reels kept by a local ham radio operator, a man named Russell Kane. You can hear him in the recordings trying to respond, asking questions into the static. The voice hums louder, then stops. And in the silence, just before the tape ends, you can hear something else. The faint sound of breathing right next to the microphone. By November, the fences came down. Without warning, no announcement, no cleanup. Just gone. The federal workers vanished overnight, and the ridge was silent once more. When state police arrived, they found the equipment melted. Not burned, not corroded. Melted. As though the ground itself had turned to glass and swallowed it. Residents nearby said the air tasted of metal for weeks. Car batteries failed, lights flickered, and livestock refused to eat. And in one of the abandoned houses at the edge of the forest, a little girl's dress was found hanging from a nail. Burlap, freshly sewn. The tag sewn into the collar had one word embroidered in dark red thread: Carver. Even after all that, no official record mentions the name. The entire region was quietly omitted from state maps in 1985. But the people who live near those hills will tell you, sometimes after rain, you can still hear that hum under the dirt. And if you listen too long, it starts to match your heartbeat. In 1997, nearly 3 decades after the children were first found, a man calling himself E. Mallory Jeager appeared at the Fairview Historical Society, requesting access to sealed archives from 1968. The clerk on duty, a retired schoolteacher named Ruth Hanlon, said he was polite, quiet, with pale eyes that didn't seem to blink often. When she asked his relation to the late Dr. Edwin Mallory, he smiled and said, "I was born from his work." He signed his name, but the pen left no ink. She still kept the paper, though, faint pressure marks in a perfect circle. A week later, the archives were broken into. not stolen, rearranged. Files relating to the Hollow Ridge clan were found stacked in threes. Stones were discovered on the floor, laid in another circle. The alarm never triggered, though the cameras showed static from 11:03 to 11:09 p.m. Exactly 6 minutes, the same length of the blackout that had shut down the facility in 1969. 2 months later, reports began circulating among amateur radio operators of a strange new frequency bleeding into emergency channels. A low pulse at 19 hertz, too low for most humans to hear, but strong enough to shake windows. Those who recorded it claimed they could hear faint words when the signal was slowed down. The soil remembers. By 2001, several disappearances were linked to the area again. Hikers, trespassers, thrill seekers chasing old legends. But one case in particular brought everything back into focus. The body of a young man found near the creek where the first Carver girl had been discovered. His autopsy report was classified, but the coroner's assistant left a note: no decomposition, internal temperature below freezing, eyes contain traces of hematite. Hematite, the same iron ore that runs through Hollow Ridge. When investigators examined his backpack, they found a small notebook. Inside were sketches of the ridge, the cellar, and a sequence of numbers scrawled repeatedly: 6, 9, 12, again and again, until the page tore. Locals say he wasn't the first to go looking for the truth, but he might have been the first to bring something back. And in the months that followed, a series of anonymous letters arrived at the Fairview Gazette. Each envelope contained a single black stone and a note that read, "They're awake again." The children remember the light. Even today, no one knows who sent them. But the handwriting, the slanted, trembling script, matched the original field notes of Dr. Edwin Mallory, a man who'd been dead since 1970. They say the ridge breathes again. That after 50 years of silence, Hollow Ridge is waking, not as a place, but as something alive, something thinking. In the autumn of 2018, seismic sensors across 3 counties began picking up shallow tremors, too rhythmic to be tectonic. The official explanation was groundwater movement, but the recordings tell a different story. Each pulse matched the cadence of a heartbeat, slow, measured. A team of independent researchers visited the ridge under the guise of environmental testing. They were never heard from again, but their drone footage survived, uploaded to a private drive 2 days before their disappearance. The video shows the ridge from above, blanketed in mist. Then, for a moment, the trees part, revealing a dark spiral in the earth, a sinkhole breathing, expanding, contracting. And from that hollow center rises something faint, something that glows just beneath the surface. A lattice of light pulsing like veins. After that footage leaked, the government sealed the ridge once more. Black vehicles, no insignias. Satellite imagery was blurred for a 5-mile radius. Even GPS signals bend there now, looping endlessly in circles if you try to trace the perimeter. It's as if the land itself refuses to be mapped. Some say the Carvers were never a cult. They were guardians. That the children weren't victims. They were vessels, carriers of whatever lives beneath that shale and iron. A consciousness older than the mountains. One of the last surviving deputies from the original 1968 investigation spoke in an interview before his death. His words were soft, barely above a whisper. Those kids, they weren't scared of the dark. They were the dark. They were what the ridge made to remember itself. And sometimes, late at night, truckers still report seeing figures along Route 9. Small, barefoot children walking hand in hand, eyes reflecting blue light. If you stop, they don't move. If you keep driving, your radio picks up a hum. Maybe they never left that ridge. Maybe they never could. Because Hollow Ridge isn't just a place where something happened. It's something that's still happening. A pulse beneath the earth, waiting for someone to listen long enough to let it in. And if you've listened this far, you already have. Welcome to Hollow Ridge. It's been waiting for you.